Hi guys, how are y'all doing? My name is Ryan, and today we're going to be looking at problem number 448 from LeetCode's top 100 most liked questions, and it's find all numbers disappeared in an array, right? And the problem is given an integer array where every element is between 1 and n, where n is the size of the array, some elements appear twice and others appear once. And our goal is to find all the elements from 1 to n inclusive that don't appear in this array. And as a side goal, we're trying to do this without any extra space and an O of n runtime, right? So at first glance, this seems really, really hard to do without any extra space, especially when we're trying to keep track of something that could be possibly as big as n over 2, right? However, we're given an array of nums, right? We're given a list of nums, and we can use that space to keep track and mark things that we've already seen. And the strategy that we're going to be using is if we see an element with value x, we're going to mark nums x minus 1, right? So this seems kind of hard at first to digest, but let's kind of take a look at breaking down a problem with this strategy, right? So let's assume nums is 3, 2, 1, 4, and 4, right? And so because nums has size 5, right, these elements are supposed to range from 1 to 5, and we just have to check which elements are not in this array, right? So the first thing that we're going to do is our rule is if we see an element with value x, we're going to mark nums x minus 1. We're going to loop through this array, and the first element that we see is an element with value 3, right? So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to mark nums 3 minus 1. The way we mark these numbers while still trying to preserve their value is by flipping it from positive to negative, right? So at first it says that we're given an array of numbers that are all from 1 to n, right? So now we're going to try to make the numbers that we see, right, negative, right? So we're going to mark nums 3 minus 1, which is, of course, nums with the element of at index 2 of nums, right, which is 1. So we're going to turn that into negative 1, all right? The next element we see is 2, right? So we're going to try and mark nums 2 minus 1, right? And we're going to, and it being itself, right, nums at index 1, right, we're going to flip it to negative 2. All right. So even though the next number we see is negative 1, right, we still want to mark the element at index 1 minus 1, right? So what we do is we take the absolute value of 1, right, and we mark nums 1 minus 1, right? So that would be index 0, right? So we're going to mark nums 0. Finally, we mark nums 4 minus 1, 4 being the next element in 4 being the next element in our in nums, right? And we're gonna mark nums index 3, right, turning it negative. And after that, we encounter another 4, but we already saw this number before, right? Because and we checked that if it's already marked, we don't want to remark it, because if we flip it back again, it'll become positive, and it's almost and then we start to lose data, right? So if we've already written a number before, we just don't do anything with it, right? The next thing that we do after we took the painstaking chore of marking all the numbers is we want to loop through the array to see which elements are not marked, right? So clearly, just from using our eyes, we can see that 4 is not marked, which means that 5 was not in the original array, right? If 4 was not marked, that means 5 was not in the original array. Obviously, we're going to return a list with 5 inside. All right. Now, this seems a little bit harder to do in code, right? But be patient with me as I step through it, right? So the first thing that we want to do is we want to loop through the elements of nums, right? So for I in nums, right? And so I represents the element in nums. So I would be, your 3, your 2, your 1, your 4, and your 4, right? So we're gonna take I, right? And we're gonna check whether the element at nums I minus 1, right, is negative or not, right? So if nums absolute value, right? Remember, if a number is already marked, we still want to keep track of the value there, right? Absolute value of I minus minus 1 is greater than 0, right? So this is the case. We check the number, and if it's greater than 0, it means it hasn't been marked before. So what we're going to do is change num's absolute value of I minus 1 to be equal to negative num values to be the negative of itself, right? And so after this for loop, what we have is we have an array inside nums that has everything marked that needs to be marked, right? Now we need to go through and we need to append things to my return list, right, that aren't marked, right? So now, because I want to look at the index of these elements, right, I'm the loop through the range len of nums, right? So the difference between the second one and the second for loop and the first for loop is the first for loop I wanted to look directly at the elements in numbers, and the second one I wanted to look directly at the indexes in numbers, right? So I want to check obviously if it hasn't been marked, and if it hasn't been, I want to append I plus 1. Remember in our example right here, right? If 4 hasn't been, if the element at index 4 isn't marked, it means 5 wasn't in the original array, right? Because we went down by 1, right? So return list.append I plus 1, and at the end of this, we're going to return list. Boom, that's what we're talking about. If you like this video, please give it a like and comment down below if you have any questions. Peace.